banks, acting together, were able to block the BSP by means of a temporary restraining order, or TRO, from a Manila Regional Trial Court and a Court of Appeals Division. That then took its sweet time on the BSP's urgent appeal for a reversal of the TRO. But that's merely circling your wagons. Eventually, the cavalry has to come to the rescue. Now, where would the cavalry come from? Apparently, according to this newspaper column that appeared in September 2008, the cavalry would come in the form of the House of Representatives. You look at the, if you look at the title of the thing, it involved a House bill.
Yes, House Bill 3827, titled An Act Suspending the Required Capital Adequacy Ratio Prescribed by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas to all rural banks for a period of 2 years.
Now, this was filed and it was sent to the Bangko Sentral and the Rural Bankers Association for comment. Now, the Rural Bankers Association opposed the bill in these words. It said that the capital adequacy ratio currently required by the BSP, or the availability of enough capital to cover at least a significant portion of your obligations, quote,
is the bedrock of prudential regulation. It serves to protect depositors and promote the stability and efficiency of the financial system. The proposed suspension of the CAR, while temporary, may create an environment for an erosion of this bedrock. It may unintentionally open a window for behaviors posing moral hazard, detrimental to the rural banking sector as a whole. The suspension of CAR may well be a setback for the increasingly improving and growing rural banking sector.
Aha, there's our concept for the day, moral hazard. Now, the Bangko Sentral, in commenting on the same proposed bill, told the House it was proposing a reckless suspension of regulations. Kenneth, would you like to read?
The proposed prudential safeguard contained in House Bill 3827 for banks to just maintain a condition of liquidity adequate to protect the interest of depositors and creditors does not address the solvency issue and cannot therefore be relied upon to adequately protect depositors and creditors in the long run. Liquidity and solvency are two different things. While liquidity ensures that on a regular basis the bank is able to meet the withdrawals of its depositors and pay its obligations as they fall due, solvency ensures that the value of the bank's assets are at least equal to its liabilities, plus a sufficient buffer for contingencies. A liquid but insolvent bank means that it only survives because of continued flow of deposits and borrowings that ultimately cannot be paid. And the longer such a situation is allowed to persist, the bigger the potential hit for the public when the music finally stops.
That, it seems, was the end of that. Now, how could the House continue to push for a law that the BSP and the rural bankers themselves said would cause more problems? But then you also know that the House finally proposed and achieved raising the coverage of deposit insurance from 250 to $500,000 pesos. The cavalry formation was first spotted in October 2008 when House Bill number 5315, sponsored by Speaker Prospero C. Nograles and Congressman Jaime Lopez, proposing the raising of insurance coverage on deposits from 250 to $500,000 pesos, was endorsed by Jose Nograles, head of the PDIC and brother of the Speaker. Jose Nograles said that he backed the Prospero Nograles bill because the bill in turn was viewed as part of the so-called financial defense package proposed by Governor Joey Salceda of Albay, where Santo Domingo Town happens to have another administration stalwart, Celso de Los Angeles, as its mayor. But unfortunately, by December of 2008, the game was up. Now, if you'd like to read more before we reach our interview portion, do visit Neil Ferguson's website, and you can see a picture of it behind us. And we'll also have links to some of the articles we've quoted tonight. But when we return, we'll ask our guest, as this Inquirer editorial asked, how on earth can the public and innocent depositors expect our institutions to sort out this ethical and financial mess?
Books featured by The Explainer are available on shelves or on order at a different bookstore.
We're joined by former Finance Secretary Ernest Leung. Now, Mr. Leung was also a past president of the PDIC and of the PSC. I'd also like to welcome students from the Ateneo de Davao who joined us right after the show started. Welcome back to the show. Mr. Leung, let me start by, most people when they're following the headlines would have only have seen that the central bank wanted to look into these banks and do something about it, at which point the banks went to the courts and stopped the clock. Now, your belief is that there's something much deeper to this.
Indeed. What is seen is just the reaction to something more fundamentally deficient in the system. The Philippine insurance system, the Philippine banking system, has one of the most unique handicap in terms of ensuring compliance with sound banking practices. Earlier you were talking about capital adequacy ratios and all that. And all this comes into the examination and audit of the balance sheet, the asset side, the liability side. And all examiners throughout the world that I have talked to are never constrained from auditing both sides of the balance sheet. It's common sense. You must audit freely the assets, the liabilities, and the deposit is one of the major liabilities of the banks. I was just looking at the statistics in the banking sector. 70% of their funding sources, 70% of total assets is funded by deposits. And that account is, by bank secrecy, cannot be examined. So
even as a whole?
As a whole, individually, bank by bank, because of the 1955 Act, Republic Act 1401. That was an act that has certain motivations, probably misguided. In hindsight, certainly it is. It was meant to try to improve deposits in the banking system, but in the process, it did not allow piercing of those accounts. And the only time the, let's say, examiners come to take a look at those deposit accounts is when the bank closed. When I was in PDIC, we are always confronted with the agony of, for the first time in the responsibility of the PDIC in the examination of bank, it's only when the bank has failed, it's determined not to be viable and therefore closed, then we examine the deposit accounts. And there are quite a lot of these unscrupulous bankers. They sometimes do not enter the deposits into the records of the bank. And sometimes we even get, we ask the retained employees. A depositor comes around with a savings book. And we ask, was this issued by your bank? And they say, yes. Why is it not in the records of the bank? Because we were instructed by the manager. Because if it was recorded in the computer printout, it will be summed up. So your total liability will be bigger, but if you don't put in the record, it looks smaller, then you have a higher net worth. So this is the problem in the Philippines.
Okay, now there's another problem that seems to be emerging from the failure of the legacy banks. So what you're saying basically is that the institutions are expected just to sort of clean up the mess, but don't have the legal and other tools to actually be a little more proactive and prevent banks from just collapsing. Now, there's another problem here. According to some newspaper accounts, there's supposed to be a two-tiered process here. The Bangko Sentral steps in and says, you have to shut down because you're a mess. And then they say, okay, we now hand it over to the PDIC. You guys take a look at these books and figure out who gets paid what. That cooperation seems to have broken down now between the PDIC and the BSP.
I don't think so. I don't think it would, because it is a necessary cooperation between the two institutions. And you earlier mentioned about an approach by PDIC for financing from the central bank. So central bank, even from that point of view, would be
has
very
a right to look into.
Right, and very careful about not working together. However, there are situations when there is a little bit more forbearance on one side than on the other. Sometimes some of us are accused of being too tough. And I'd rather have the tough guys than to have forbearing, and definitely not too forbearing. I mean, when you have both forbearing, you are in a
then that leaves a lot of wiggle room for the bad guys.
Manolo, we have a question from our audience. Joanna would like to ask.
Is the Legacy Group of companies also involved?